Well, we have the great honor to have one of the pioneers of cryptocurrency here. So he's really a very important figure in the space. It's Nick Szabo from the United States. There you are. Great, Nick. Hey, good to have you here.
Gracias.
Stage is yours, Nick.
Gracias. Buenos dias. Welcome. So we've witnessed a great spontaneous and tremendous growth in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, and very spontaneous, not officially sponsored. And at some point we're going to be entering a new era where this is starting to get the attention of central bankers and people running competing currencies. And so we're going to enter an era, unfortunately, where politics is going to become more important, quite probably. So, oh boy. Let me fix this. Oh, okay. Okay, so I want to talk about, I'm going to go through a history of money, some facts about money, and I'm going to start off talking about definitions of money, because that's the first tricky place where people do kind of shucking and jiving on their debating about this. So I'll go into the definitions of money. So there's legal definitions to start off with, and so if you're dealing with your lawyer and stuff, this is where you start out with, and these tend to be very narrow. So, for example, in the United States, money is defined under the Uniform Commercial Code as currently authorized or adopted by a government. And so the practical consequence of this, the Uniform Commercial Code governs things like checks and so forth. You can't write a check in the US for Bitcoin or gold. It's not money by the legal definition. And I'll move on to the scientific definitions of money, or more scientific definitions, but really though there's not any pure scientific definition of money. Beware of the argument that says X isn't money because it doesn't fit definitions A, B, C, therefore we can safely ignore it. As I'm going to show you, there's a whole bunch of things that are pretty close to money, that are very similar in form or function to what people are willing to agree is money. And if you ignore those, you're ignoring 90% plus of the broad history of money. So I'm going to talk about money and jewelry, a broad category of related objects I call collectibles that have an intertwined evolution, as I'll show. And so now the economist's definition of money also tend to be a little misleading if you take them too literally. Store of value, there's really no such thing as a pure store of value. You have to, at the end of the day, have a useful ability to usefully transfer it. And medium of exchange is a very narrow definition because there are many important kinds of wealth transfer, which I'll talk about, that aren't exchanges. Things like taxation, inheritance, legal compensation, and so forth. And unit of account, a typical modern multinational corporation uses multiple units of account. They operate in multiple countries, pay taxes in multiple countries, and increasingly some of them are doing business with cryptocurrency as well. So there actually isn't a single global unit of account. And so these come from the conditions Bitcoin currently finds itself in, and they don't have much to do with the technology, that some of the arguments made about why Bitcoin might not be so useful as money. So it's too volatile to be money. Well, it's very uncertain what the future is. There's a potential for Bitcoin to become a global currency, or Bitcoin may be supplanted by a superior cryptocurrency. It may be politically suppressed. That would be very difficult to do completely, but it could be done partially. Those things add to the uncertainty and the volatility of Bitcoin. That's a temporary market condition. That's not something fundamental to the technology. And hardly anybody accepts Bitcoin as payment. Again, that that relates to the volatility, and it relates to adoption, which grows over time. And this one does relate to technology too, because there's layer 2 technology I'll talk about, which can help solve that problem. Authority resemblance. So I'm going to take a long trip back to the history of money, because it's very important that we have this broad perspective and the facts, and don't fall for these little anecdotes about yapstones and nonsense like that. So I'm going to take a very broad trip through the most common and popular forms of money and collectibles. So this is what United States dollar had on it. In its original form, it was an IOU for gold. You could go into a bank. Some of these were actually privately issued. I don't have a picture of that here, but some dollars are privately issued by banks. You could go into the bank, get gold or silver for it. 1928 series, redeemable in gold on demand. And they changed that to lawful money under Franklin Roosevelt in 1934. But in fact, if you're a big banker, you could still go get gold. But they changed the ratio, so they kind of gypped people at that point by changing by fiat the ratio. But we're still on a nominal gold system right up until 1970. So big bankers and countries and stuff could take a US dollar and they could convert it into gold. And unfortunately, the US issued too many dollars and reneged on its ultimate promise of gold. So basically what you have here going on is throughout the 20th century, the legal definition of what a dollar was changed radically, and the trust characteristics changed radically. More and more, it became trust-based. First, it was an IOU, so you had to trust them to get the gold. Then they restricted that. Only big bankers could go get the gold. And then they eliminated it completely. So it's now called what's called the pure fiat system. So a pure fiat system is more based on trust. It's more political. We have to put the central banker on the financial TV every day to figure out what this dictator, these handful of people are going to do with our money and our savings. So if you look at the price stability now, some people have gathered statistics on various sides and argued that under various parts of the gold standard, prices may have been a little less stable. Those are somewhat arguable and questionable. There's also evidence on the other side. This is Bretton Woods up until 1970, and you see that big spike a little after 1970. That's the increase in volatility of strategic commodities, phosphate and oil. And so what happened is these are cross-border strategically important commodities, and when the U.S. went off gold, the people who produced these commodities insisted they wanted to get their gold value for their dollar. So the volatility of these commodities has radically increased after the U.S. went off gold. And this is why you get these Malthusian scares and, oh, we're running out of oil and we're running out of this and out of that. It tends to be more the value of the money is the problem. So back to this gold, what were they getting? So back in 1998 when we were on the LibTech list with economists George Selgin and Larry White, and they were talking about these private banknotes that you could get gold for. To me, what was interesting is you could get the gold for it. That was the trust minimized money. The debt money, the IOU money is trust-based, and you can somewhat trust it as long as you can go to the window and get the gold, but if you can't get the gold, all of a sudden you don't trust it and there's a run on the bank. So I'm going to drop back in time now and talk about gold and silver and why people value these so much. This is a Viking hoard. It's got coins in it. It's got these little blobs called ingots, and it's got some ugly jewelry. And so this isn't a coin hoard or a jewelry hoard or an ingot hoard. Those are our modern categories of how we put things. The Vikings thought of this as a silver hoard. So you can think of this as having two protocol layers. the artful form, which can be coins or jewelry or so forth, and the natural substance. And for most people, for most of history, the natural substance has been the thing of value, the money, the store value, the collectible. And the artful form was for convenience, including coins. And so, unfortunately, you get a lot of fallacious thinking among economists, where they go to the Middle Ages and they count all the coins because that's money, and they don't count the jewelry or the plate or the many other forms gold and silver took. And it leads to some fallacious thinking about how monetary economics worked. So with the advent of coins, we got two different ways of counting. By weight was the international, the lower level of the protocol, the weight of the gold or silver, and counting by coins, which was a convenient way to do it. And as you can see with a later evolution, that just evolved into IOUs for coins and eventually just fiat money. So this is an example of non-coin money. This was widely used as a medium of trade in the Indian Ocean. It's called a silver laren. It's basically, or fishhook money. It's basically a wire. If you want to see whether that wire is good money or not, you can cut it in a random place. So it's got a nice auditing protocol, and you can inspect it. And if it's been tarnished or accumulated debris on it, you can put it on a hot fire and burn that off. And then it's kind of a low-tech visual spectroscopy that, because of the electron shell structure of the gold, you can tell by its white color whether it's, or silver I should say, whether it's genuine silver or whether it has copper impurities or other impurities in it. And the oldest surviving legal code in the world, this is 1,400 years before the invention of coinage. This is the Code of Ur-Nama. The specific instructions are weigh and deliver gold. So it doesn't say, oh, you owe us gold and you can give us a clay tablet IOU for gold. No, it says weigh and deliver gold. And there's other tablets. I mean, there's a whole bunch of tablets of this kind of evidence, but another set of tablets with traders who trade actual silver and copper. And there's an account of a traveling salesman. He travels one city to another city, and I paid 5 minas of refined copper in one city. I spent 3 minas of copper in another city. I acquired and spent small wares with a value of 4 shekels of silver. So these are all units of weight. There's nothing to do with coins or anything. Those don't exist. So the minas of copper and shekels. So you have a ratio, exchange ratio between gold and copper here. And you're not going to travel to a bunch of strange cities and give people IOUs. You're going to pay the actual trust minimized money. And so there's this myth that Mesopotamia was all about debt money and so forth, and they had somehow had sophisticated banknotes and so forth. And that is largely not the case. If you did not have a trust relationship, you paid the underlying trust minimized copper and silver. And that concept of trust minimization is very important because that's basically the key to the design of cryptocurrencies. Here's some others. There's these wire forms are very common. Lots of ugly, puzzling jewelry in the archaeological record before coins. And we can look at the invention of coins themselves. On top is the evolution from shells to coins in China. And on the bottom here is the evolution from shell beads to coins in Lydia, Near East, and later Greece. And so we have on the left here, these are all made out of electrum. And these are some beads here. These are beads that resemble cowrie shells. So both from China all the way to Europe, people were using cowrie shells and as a medium of wealth transfer and store value, and money, depending on your definition of money. This is where people start to quibble. And so you can see remember I talked about authority resemblance, like our dollar looks the same even though they radically changed the definition of what a dollar is. Well, you can see this in the archaeological record. These are electrometal, but they're making them look like shells. And over in China, they did the same thing, bronze cowries, metal beads made to look like shell beads. And eventually this evolves, ant knows money, and then the Chinese kept the string nature of it. So up until the European influence, post-Columbian European influence, the Chinese used strings of cash. So all along they were using their money on strings. And at the bottom, the West chose to put it in purses and hide it away and lost the hole in it. And that the next step after this are the flat coins that we're familiar with. And if I'm going backwards in time, backwards and backwards. So if we take beads back, this is a necklace of copper beads. These are among the earliest copper beads in the archaeological record. So when metal was invented, it wasn't invented when we first started smelting copper and working gold. It was not invented for tools like spades or hoes or so forth. It was not invented for weapons. Those would be great later uses of it. But what it was invented for were beads. And these are the first metal objects in the archaeological record. And so these are copper beads. They substitute basically straight out for spiny oyster beads. And this is the world's oldest gold artifact right here. So these have played just a huge important role. It's just archaeology, so it's speculation on what specifically that role was in these societies. But these objects played a huge role in these societies. And indeed, such an important role that's why metal was invented. That's why we started working metal. Humans started working metal in the first place. And so we do have some anthropological records. Most of the anthropological records are confused because Europeans or other powers came in and enforced their own legal systems. And as you'll see, a lot of the wealth transfer was involved in the versions of the legal system that the indigenous people had. So you don't necessarily, when you read one of these modern anthropological accounts, you're not necessarily getting at all an accurate view of what the actual thing that existed, institutions that existed before the European influence. But anyway, this is one that probably had a lesser influence. It was further away from the railroad tracks before it was observed and recorded. These are non-agricultural, but they live in villages, fishing villages. They use dentalia shells. They imported the dentalia shells, and it's a very common pattern to import collectibles thousands and thousands of miles. This is thousands and thousands of miles down the Pacific coast, all the way from British Columbia to Northern California. And this guy here, he's got tattooed. These guys took their shells very, very seriously. Again, very important part of their culture. This guy has tattoo marks on his arm, permanent marks, the ruler marks. The purpose of these marks is to mark off standard lengths. And the standard lengths tell you how valuable it is. So basically, you compare them to tattoos, you can see what denomination of shell you have. So what did they use them for? Anthropological record suggests actually very different from what we use money for now. So trade a little bit, but let's see. But the major, even more important than trade and exchange, were injury compensation for disputes because there wasn't government. It's like we know them today. So people would go to war if they couldn't solve a dispute, and they would solve them through payments of these collectibles. Peacemaking and tribute, it's a related thing, of course. Bride wealth and inheritance. And I call these fitness critical wealth transfers because they were important to the Darwinian fitness of the people. And the archaeological record shell exists for at least 100,000 years in the archaeological record. So potentially this stuff goes way, way back in human evolution. And transfers of value, again, they're always important in the life cycle. You can call these collectibles stores of value. These are some large shells that are particularly rare and valuable in this Melanesian culture, Southwest Pacific. And they're stores of value because but you can think of them also as very low velocity money. They don't get transferred very often, but when they do get transferred, it's for something very, very important. Such as a marriage or death, preventing a war, things like that. So these are the different kinds of shells that were used, the main ones. They're all made out of the same material. Remember, I showed you, I guess I didn't mention when I showed you, but copper, gold, and silver are on top of each other in the periodic table, have very similar properties. And so it's not at all coincidence that we picked those for money and for collectibles, such as jewelry, because of very particular properties of durability and so forth they had. And a similar thing with these shells. They have, if the bioorganics of how these shells form means that they're very durable. You've got pearls, spiny oyster shells, ostrich egg shells, wampum, used by the Northeast American natives. Cowrie shells are very widely used around the Indian Ocean and in China and even parts of Europe, and dentalia shells right there from we saw with Europe. So now, that was my trip back through time. I'm going to pop back up now. I talked about trust minimization is one of the themes and what makes the kind of money and collectibles I talked about different from debt money, IOUs, the kinds of things modern economists like to talk about as being the only kind of money that matters. Actually, what I just showed you is about 99% of monetary history. So if somebody comes along and tells you, oh, it's all about debt money or fiat money or so forth, pure fiat money has only existed since 1970, and debt money was basically been IOUs for what is 99% of monetary history, which is what I just showed you, which is trust minimized money. So having studied this and learned computer science, and this is one of computer science pioneers here, Ralph Merkle, inventor of the Merkle tree, I wanted to apply computer science to create what I consider to be real money, which is trust minimized money. And so a group of us got together on the LibTech list, Wei Dai, Hal Finney, myself, and George Selgin and Larry White, who are two free market banking people, and had a lot of cool discussions. And out of that came BitGold, which was my design for cryptocurrency in 1998, and Wei Dai's B-Money also in 1998. And so we wanted to apply the tools of previous generations that didn't have available, the internet, cheap computing, to privatize the issuance of money, and so forth. Apply computer science to these problems. And so one of the benefits we had available is all this computational surplus. So computational cost has gone down many, many orders of magnitude over the last century, but the human brain remains the same. So people have speculated a lot about the future and what that might bring and so forth. But to me, I was interested in the past, and we have this huge surplus. And if you can figure out how to substitute a trust-minimized computer function for a trust-based human function, that's a huge win, like going from debt money to the gold and silver itself. So trusted third parties are security holes was one of our watchwords. And so we want to design software to minimize the vulnerabilities of parties to each other, to infrastructure providers, counterparties, and third parties. And basically, this is practically a synonym for security. If you consider in broad what you're trying to do with security, you can think of, people tend to think of narrow, I'm trying to protect this money from theft here or that from that there. This is kind of really a general definition of security. And we see this play out in Bitcoin. The exchanges such as Mt. Gox, Bitfinex, and so forth have had a lot of problems with thefts. Bitcoin itself, the worst that's happened is a BGP attack for 83,000. Bitcoin itself is probably now the most secure and reliable financial network in the world. And it's just because it's trust minimized. It means you can use it in Albania, send money to Zimbabwe, you can send money from Colombia to Canada, and you don't have to worry about New York City or international politics or any of that nonsense. Timestamp collisions. So big part of this was the Merkle trees and timestamping of hash collisions. And so now I'm talking about Bitcoin versus fiat currencies. Bitcoin provides a strong trust minimized integrity, which gives you independence from financial institutions and seamless operation across borders. And up to a hard fork, that trust minimization includes the money supply. And one of the reasons people should be very, very wary of hard forks is just because of this, because a hard fork can change the money supply. So you should be very, for that and many other reasons, you should be very wary of hard forks. So I talked about layer 1 so far, which is the blockchain itself. Unfortunately, it's not very scalable. In my big old design, I had a two-tier design where I had a centrally issued cash as the payment system. It also had some privacy features, and the blockchain for the currency itself. Because you don't have integrity for the currency in your cross-border transfers, you don't have integrity for the rest of it either. And so that's the core. That's why many of us want Bitcoin to be digital gold, is because that's the core that you need to keep integrity. But there are much better second layer financial networks than when we were thinking about this stuff back in 1998. So Lightning, Sprite are just some examples. RSK, which I think there's an announcement for today, is also a significant advance along those lines. And these are basically using smart contract techniques to establish collateralized channels outside the blockchain. Well, they're collateralized on the blockchain, but you can pay off the blockchain. And so those get you back to the small value. So we've seen the phases of the small value transfer where you could pay 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas. Larger value transactions, so because the Bitcoin price has risen so much and its usage has risen so much, that has meant that you get larger and larger value transactions. So the amount of money flowing through Bitcoin now is many orders of magnitude greater than when we had that pizza exchange. And that's pricing out smaller transactions such as the pizza and the coffee and so forth. And so to bring that back, there's no way to bring that back and maintain the secure integrity of Bitcoin itself. To bring that back to small transactions, we need the layer 2 solutions. And so some of the layer 1 solutions, you can still do, it's very essential that we still be able to do large value transfers securely on layer 1. So cross-border B2B, remittances, large remittances, route around capital controls, and reserve currencies that are secure against war and political distrust. And again, for your day-to-day small payments, layer 2 is going to be much better. And so security is important. One of the weaknesses of gold and silver and so forth, it was relatively easy to steal. The Aztecs would collect tribute from the various indigenous tribes. Then the Spanish came and looted the Aztecs. Then the English pirates came and looted the gold from the Spanish. So that was not the most secure thing. I think we have the potential now to have a more secure, trust minimized thing. And that security, and especially security of and trust minimization of the blockchain itself, brings social scalability. It means it can work from between Albania and Zimbabwe and between Colombia and Canada without asking permission of anybody else. And the rest of the financial system does not work like that. The rest of the financial system is very, very political and permission-based in comparison. And so now Bitcoin does not have a Turing-complete scripting language, so the company Apple Computer, it started off with Apple I, Apple II. It's done phones and music players and so forth. All of those have been Turing complete. Turing Complete's a very powerful computational model. And so the RSK rootstock stuff has a great potential there, I think, to combine the best of two things. The best currency, which is Bitcoin, and Bitcoin has the best governance, by the way, also. There's a lot of utopian ideas around governance, but the really practical open source governance of Bitcoin, I think, is a huge reason for its relative success. And that's my talk. Thank you very much.